What is up, everybody? My name is Raymond Summerlin. This is the Sharp Angles podcast. We're ramping up. Training camp is here. Rich Rebar is writing every single day. He submits something to me every single day. Amazing, the best research you could ever find over at Sharp Football Analysis. The training camps are here. We're getting really close, and I'm getting really excited. And today we have a great guest, Mr. Michael F. Florio, fantasy analyst for NFL Network at Michael F. Florio on the social networks. I saw on X and Instagram. I assume it's on all the social networks at Michael F. Florio. How you doing, Michael?
I'm good, and you would assume that, but one time I made the mistake of being on a podcast, and I was like, I need to make this was like years ago. I was like, I need to make a TikTok. My username is available. I'm gonna do that tonight. In those couple of hours, someone took my username and tried to get me like for money. So on TikTok, I'm Michael F. Florio NFL. Everywhere else, Michael F. Florio.
I respect the hustle actually of that. I'm not mad at that person. I kind of respect the hustle. They haven't relinquished it yet. I wonder if you could switch now.
And the thing is, this was like 2 years ago, and they've stopped using the like they don't use it for anything. They don't answer messages. I've reached out to TikTok, and they're just like, nah, it's his account. Like, there's nothing you could do. And I've like been like, I'll send you stuff, and the guy just doesn't answer anymore. So if you're
It's
listening,
fantastic. Yeah.
please.
Please give him his name back. That would be wonderful. All right. So at Michael F. Florio, everywhere except TikTok, put an NFL at the end, and there you go. You'll be able to find him. I'm excited for you to join us here. I followed you on Twitter for a long time. I'm a really big fan of your work, and I'm excited to talk about some training camp stuff. But first, I have to say, we're recording this on Friday at noon Eastern. We're about to have live the opening ceremonies for the Olympics. And even though there was a time in my life where I worked for this tiny little company, this tiny little broadcasting company called NBC, and when that was the case, I always had to make like a big deal about the Olympics, and we always had to care about the Olympics. But you know what? I actually just think I really love the Olympics. Like I think I'm really into the Olympics. And how about you? Like, are you excited by this that we're having this happen?
Yeah, I will say I'll probably watch more swimming and random sports in the next 2 weeks than I ever will. But my fate, like Olympic basketball, is I think even more fun than NBA basketball. And
Yeah.
I go out of my like I've watched every USA pre exhibition game so far. I'm gonna be on vacation next week, and I've already looked at their schedule to be like, all right, I know I need to go somewhere with a TV at this time because I just
Yeah.
love it so much.
It's funny. I'm gonna be out of the country next week, and like that is also one of my that's also one of my things. We didn't like realize it when we planned it out. All the football folks, like July, that's our month. If we're
Yep.
gonna go somewhere, that's the month that we go. And so I was working it out with my wife and a group of friends that we're going with, and they said this week, and I said, yeah, that's great. And then I realized that the Olympics were there, and I'm upset. I know, looking at me, if you're watching us on camera, you're watching us live on on X or Twitter, as I will forever call it, or if you're watching us on YouTube after the fact, by the way, go to YouTube, subscribe to our channel, Sharp Football. You just search Sharp Football, you'll find us. If you're watching us there, you're going to look at me and you're going to think that's not a guy that likes the running events in the Olympics. But I absolutely love track and field. It's my favorite thing. I watch it like I watch Diamond League races. I watch it
Oh
throughout the
wow.
year. Like I have strong opinions about about various runners. Like I love track and field. And so yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited that I get to stream it. Everything's happy. I'm so happy. Do you see how joyful I am now that
You
the
could
Olympics
hear
are
it in
here
your
and I'm about to
voice.
get to watch I'm about to get to watch the opening ceremonies in my favorite city in the world, Paris. Just what a time. What a time to be alive. Too bad I'm not there. Actually, I think I'm happy I'm not there. It must be like it's terrible to travel around that city in the best of times. I can't imagine what it's like right now. It must be awful.
So I live in LA. It's another city
Yeah.
that, no, regardless of when it is, terrible to travel around. People are already dreading because the next Olympics is
Yeah.
here. People are
Yeah.
already dreading it. I'm like, I want to go see some basketball games. Other people are like,
Yeah.
good luck getting anywhere during that 3 weeks.
No, that's an Airbnb out the apartment kind of type. Like someone gives you 30 grand, you leave, and then you come back after the Olympics. I think that might be the way forward with you. Anyway, all right, we're going to talk about some training camp stuff. We're actually talk about American football and not all of this, not all of this European nonsense with people running, tracking. What is that? Anyway, we're going to talk about some American football. Before we do that, though, I do want to mention, I brought it up at the top. Rich Rebar is releasing a ton of information as part of our fantasy football draft kit. That's available, sharpfootballanalysis.com. Make sure you go and check that out. Warren Sharp's 2024 football preview book, still available as well. Make sure you go and check that out. You can bundle together all of our fantasy content, get our in-season content as well. Lots of great stuff over at Sharp Football Analysis. Check that out. One of the things that's going up on the site as we speak is I'm writing team previews for every team. And I actually wanted to bounce this off of you because I just kind of, went back and read, and I'm going to post very soon my preview for the Baltimore Ravens. As I'm going through the Baltimore Ravens, in all of my previews, I kind of start them at the top with just coaching. I think that, and Rich Rebar and I share this opinion. I think it's why we unfortunately agree on so much. It's not great for, podcasting together, but one of the reasons we see things the same is I'm a very top down kind of fantasy analyst. The team is where you start. You don't start at the player. You think, I think this player is good. Okay, well, the best player that gets 20 targets isn't going to be a great fantasy player. That's just unfortunately the way it is. And when you take a top down look at the Baltimore Ravens, one of the things that's most interesting is if you just look at like their totals and you look at just like total dropbacks last year, it wasn't great. They were, I think, 26th in the NFL. So they weren't dropping back a ton. And you think, okay, even though we've transitioned here to Todd Monken, are we really getting more of that pass heavy offense that we're kind of hoping for? But then when you kind of like go beneath the hood, you notice some things about their season. One of the most interesting stats about the Ravens last season is they ran just 85 offensive plays while trailing in the second half last season. That's the fewest in the league. It was easily the fewest in the league. It's the seventh fewest for any team since the year 2000. By the way, the 2004 Patriots ran 45 plays trailing in the second half, which is unreal. That's just unreal. But anyway, so the Ravens had a really like outlier season in second halves. They did not have to drop back in the second half. Their drop back rate when leading in the second half was only 44.3%, and they were leading almost all the time in the second half. But then you go and look at the first half of games, and they were ninth in drop back rate in the first half of games. They were seventh in neutral pass rate over at Ben Baldwin's site. He has that, running backs don't matter.com. He has the neutral pass rate, which I think is a very good stat. I use it a lot. And I look at all that and I go, okay, that's a really historic outing for them. We think they're going to be good again. There might not be that good, especially when you consider offensive line issues, losses they have on defense. We saw the 2003 Eagles have a very similar situation. 2002, they were really good. 2003, they fell back a little bit. They had to throw more. And so I think about all that. And then I think about, okay, well, if Lamar Jackson's going to have more dropbacks and he's going to average 0.6 fantasy points per dropback as he tends to do, and he's going to get closer to Josh Allen's dropback numbers. Like, I know that Lamar Jackson's already be drafted as a quarterback 3. I get all of that. But like, I think I'm just going to plant my flag and say Lamar Jackson should be drafted as a quarterback 1, and he's still at how high he's being drafted is being drafted too late. Am I crazy? Am I going too far with this?
You're not crazy. I like he definitely has I always tend to like you. I do like to start with teams from the top and build down, which is coincidentally why I was one of the few people on the like Lamar Jackson is not the MVP side of things last year. Like he was awesome, but I mean, you said it yourself. Barely ever trailing in the second half. Elite defense, elite rushing
Their
attack.
defense
Oh,
was unimaginably good.
yeah.
Unimaginably good.
It made life so much easier on Lamar. Like he had, I would say, the best supporting cast arguably in football outside of maybe the Chiefs last year, which I was a little bit of a homer. I was on the Josh Allen should be the MVP, but that's an argument for a different time.
Fair enough.
I always think of players for fantasy standpoint as a range of outcome. And Lamar Jackson's ceiling is the QB1, but I think that is a much more he has a lower it's lower than Josh Allen's chances. I think it's lower than Jalen Hurts' chances. I would say it's lower than Mahomes, and it's crazy to say Anthony Richardson, but I think his chances might be high because yes, we want Lamar to pass more. But even last year with the increase in all of his passing numbers, he still didn't get to 3,700 yards. It's really hard to be the QB1 if you're not throwing for at least 4,000 yards. And then the flip side is like he runs And he led the QB position in rushing yards last year, but he doesn't run near the goal line. And
Yeah.
that is uber valuable. Like, for some reason, people love to devalue rushing touchdowns for quarterbacks, but for fantasy, that matters even more than rushing yards. Like, it is the ultimate cheat code. So that's why I think the reason I said I think the other guys have a higher odd is just because for years now, Allen and Hurts have been their team's goal line runner. And even I don't think neither one of them gets to 15 touchdowns again. Feels like a safe bet that they'll be in the 7, 8, maybe even 10 range. Anthony Richardson could be in that range as well. And the reason for Mahomes, I think, has a slightly higher odd is because I think Mahomes could go for 5,050 this year with the receiving core that he has. So while I do think Lamar can be the QB1, to me, the thing that interests me most about him is his floor. Like, his floor is, if he stays healthy, is top 5 fantasy quarterback, and not many players can say that. So it's crazy thinking back to 2019 what Lamar was, and we were like, oh my god, this is the greatest season ever by a quarterback. This is, for fantasy purposes, like the ceiling is untouched. He's kind of transitioned now to be more of a safe floor, like the highest floor in the game, I would say. But that to me is what appeals me so much to Lamar. But yeah, if they have to start throwing more and everything, it's not out of the realm of possibility at all that he could be the QB1.
I want to be clear, like when I'm saying dropbacks, I don't even necessarily mean throwing, which obviously if you're
Yeah.
dropping back more, you're going to throw more. But like his rushing yards per game last year was lower, and I think people are pointing at that and saying, are we entering a different part of his career? And that's certainly possible. But also the dropbacks play into that as well because of how many yards are coming out of scrambles and things of that nature. I do think your point about goal line touchdowns is very good and very important to remember. It's actually one of the things about Derrick Henry. While you're not worried about Derrick Henry's touchdown upside as you are about Saquon Barkley, is because they don't use Lamar Jackson around the goal line as much. I don't have the numbers, right off the top of my head. It's actually going to be in my Ravens preview. It's in there, so you can read that later today once I get that posted. But we don't see that same type of, vulturing from Lamar Jackson. And so I think that that's a really important part of it. But also, even with those rushing touchdowns, which really, rushing touchdowns were what saved Josh Allen last year. Like,
Yes.
that's the long and the short of it. That's what saved him. Even with that, he averaged basically the same fantasy points per drop back as Lamar Jackson did, even with those rushing touchdowns. And that's, and then you go and look at, that Lamar Jackson, didn't have as many dropbacks, obviously, but then you go look at Lamar Jackson, he was running less. He wasn't having to do as much. Josh Allen has lost all of those receivers. We don't know what that offense is going to continue to look like. And by the way, that 0.59 fantasy points per dropback for Lamar Jackson last year, that's below his career average. His career average is 0.68, which would have been well above where Josh Allen and Brock Purdy, who were first and second in that last year, were. And so I agree with you. The touchdowns are a big part, and that's why this is a conversation for sure. But I think that maybe we are underestimating what the actual upside of Lamar Jackson is, because I think from a per drop back perspective, he has been a lot better than he was last year, and he was still already very good last year. And that's kind of where it comes from me. If he goes routes and rushes for 1,000 yards, like, you would say, okay, yeah, fair,
Yeah.
that's fine. And so, like, that's, I don't know. It's an interesting conversation, but you might have guessed I have a lot of Lamar Jackson in best ball leagues, and am I gonna cope my way through it? Who knows? Is he going to be hurt week 2 and I'm going to cry? You never know. You never know how this is all going to go. Let's talk about the Rams backfield. Let's talk about the Rams backfield for a second, because I was really excited. Another player I've been investing in a lot on the buying window, in Kyren Williams, and I'm worried that buying window has slammed shut. It slammed shut on Thursday. It was Thursday, July 25th, and no longer was the buy window there. Williams was a full participant to start camp. Charles Robinson from Yahoo said Williams is, quote, unquestionably the guy at running back. Sean McVay did say, they want to be smart with Williams' workload, and obviously you have some injury concerns outside of that. But, like, are your concerns about Williams as large as maybe they were 2 months ago? Are we back in this, like, all right, Williams is the running back one in this offense that has always created fantasy points for their running back ones?
Yeah, so my offseason with Kyren Williams has been full circle. Like, post NFL season, I was like, this guy is a running back that I want on all my teams. And my
Yeah.
like pre NFL draft best balls, I have a lot of him in the first round. And then they drafted Blake Corum, and I got nervous, and I was like, this is going to become a split or something like that. Because Corum, I think, is a really good running back in his own right, and I think he's a really good fit for this Rams offense. He
Agree. Yeah.
is a type of player, I think, where if Kyren Williams misses time, and that always has to be factored in because he has a long history of injury, I think this, for the first time in a while, McVay has a backup that he can feel comfortable sliding in and not really losing a step. Because remember when Kyren was out last year? That's when the Rams
It was
offense
bad.
was at its
Yeah.
worst. So, but now, and then, so I was like, I don't really love Kyren. And then his ADP fell to mid to late third round, and I was like, sign me back up. If I could get
Yep.
Kyren Williams
Bye.
or Derrick
Yep.
Henry in round 3 and Isaiah Pacheco in round 4, I'm starting wide receiver every draft, and I'm still walking out of here with 2, in my opinion, top 8 fantasy running backs because I'm really high on Henry and Pacheco as well. And you hear the arguments like, oh, for years, Sean McVay has been trying to find 2 running backs ever since Todd Gurley. And I don't buy into that thinking. I think that McVay has had to have 2 running backs because of who he's had personnel wise. I think that's more of a negative on Cam Akers. And like, he was drafted to be the guy, and he just never lived up to that. So I think Kyren Williams, who's the closest thing this offense has had since Todd Gurley, is going to heavily be featured. Now, I do think Blake Corum will be used to keep his work in check a little bit. I don't think they want to give him CMC level volume again like they did down the stretch last year. But yeah, even if it's a 60-40 split, and that's probably the highest I could see it going, because I think Kyren will be heavily involved. You're going to want Kyren Williams. The only thing I'm saying is I'm typically not a huge draft all of your handcuff guys, but 2 handcuffs that I am emphasizing if I have the starter this year is Blake Corum and Trey Benson, because I love drafting James Conner where he goes, and Blake Corum, Trey Benson, you get them in like the 9th, 10th round, something like that, in at least in best ball drafts right now. I think it's really smart to just have those 2 backfields covered and just know that whichever one I have to use, if it's, hopefully it's the starter, but even if the starter gets hurt, the backup comes in, I'm still going to get very, very high level of production.
There was a time, like I guess probably in May, I've done so many drafts now, it's hard to keep track of when the
Oh
timeline
yeah.
of where we are. But I think in May there was a time where Benson was very close, like right after the draft, was very close to James Conner, and that has rectified itself. And now I am more okay with Benson. But there
Yeah.
was a time this summer I was like, what are we doing? Like
They were basically
James
going
Conner,
back to back.
it makes no sense. So James Conner is going to miss 4 games. I feel very confident that that is
Yes.
going to happen. I would feel very confident telling anybody that. However, when he's there, he was amazing last year, and I don't think we talk about enough how good he was and how good that Cardinals running game was, even without a quarterback. Even before Kyler showed up. And after Kyler showed up, that offense was actually good. I think they're like top 12 in points per
And
drive or something like that, even with a hurt Kyler Murray. But before that, even before that, their offense wasn't terrible, and that's because James Conner was awesome. And like we don't talk about him being awesome enough, I don't think.
And I think what gets overlooked too is like they were good when Kyler Murray came back, but let's not forget Marquise Brown played like half of those games, and when he played, he was playing the decoy role because he had a heel issue. Michael Wilson was consistently in and out of the lineup late in the year, so it was really Trey McBride, Greg Dortch, and like guys off the street. Now you add Marvin Harrison, you have McBride still, you have those other guys, you have like Michael Wilson and Dortch healthy again, like. The Cardinals are an offense that I find myself being way more bullish on than consensus. I love Connor. I have Marvin Harrison as a top 10 wide receiver in my rankings. I've been toying with the idea of putting McBride as my tight end 1. I think this is a
Ooh.
team that is going to surprise a lot of people.
I have been I'm not like saying that they're sells or like that they're complete fades at their cost with Harrison and McBride. There is a little bit of concern for me about like how that split ends up and whether either of them can kind of reach the ceilings that you would need at kind of where they're going. But I also am open to the idea that this like you that this offense is just good. In fact, I think here in a couple of weeks, Rich and I will probably do a podcast episode about offenses that we're underestimating, and the Cardinals will definitely be on my list because I think I don't need to sing the praises of Drew Petzing on these radio waves ever again because I said it 30 times so far this offseason. But like I agree with you. I think that that's an offense that we could look back on at the end of this season and be like, oh, they were much better than I thought they were going to be. Back to Williams, kind of transitioning back to Williams. I like your point about going into McVay's history and thinking about Cam Akers and thinking about Darrell Henderson and all of those guys. I think the difference is that Cam Akers had his month of glory, but I think the difference is that Kyron Williams was like actually good last year, really good last year. He was fifth in yards per carry among qualified backs. He was fourth in negative run rate. He was 12th in explosive run rate. He was actually good last year, and I like that makes it a lot easier for me to believe in him and pay that kind of extra price that we're paying this year versus last season because it's not this isn't a this isn't a I'm not going to speak ill of James Robinson because I love you, James Robinson. I'm so sad about how your career went. But like Kyron Williams was better than what James Robinson was in his kind of year, right? Like
Yes.
he was just a better running back overall, more successful. And that gets me a little less worried. I guess the price on Williams though is how high are we going now? With all of this great camp news, I would suspect he ends up ahead of A-Chain. I would still at this point take him ahead of Jamar Gibbs, who's obviously the running back 4. He's not going to get that high in draft. I would take him ahead of Jonathan Taylor. I have some concerns there with Anthony Richardson. And as you mentioned, the touchdown situation, how is that going to work out if Richardson ends up having the goal line situation like we've seen with Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts? So I have some issues there with Taylor. But I ultimately don't think the question of Williams is how high is he going to go among the running backs. He's probably about as high as he's going to go. Like I said, he'll jump A-Chain, but that's it. How many wide receivers does he jump? Does he get into the back half of that second round? And I think that answer is yes. And to your
Mhm.
point about how you used to be able to take 2 really good wide receivers and then draft him, that's no longer going to be the case. And does that make him, I guess, a little bit less appealing? And I think that that's really the question for where his price ends up with all of this good news.
I still would like him in the second round. Like I something I keep I if you listen to a lot of shows I go on, I'm sorry, you're gonna hear this again. But a point I keep driving home is I think more than ever before in the past, we are going to see a big shift in ADP as everyone's mind moves from best ball to redraft. Typically, especially in the early rounds, the first 2, 3 rounds, some stuff changes, but typically ADP tends to kind of stabilize and hold, especially this late in best ball season, getting into redraft. But this year, everyone went insanely wide receiver heavy. And I think that's a good strategy when you don't need 2 running backs in your lineup every single week. When you could just throw 7 names and say any 2 of these guys could have a good game and I'm fine. That's a lot different than I need a running back that I can trust for 17 weeks to get me into to a fantasy championship. So I think we're going to see Kyron Williams get pulled up the board a bit. I think Derrick Henry could easily be a second round pick come the end of August. Travis Etienne and Pacheco, I think they go from 4th round picks to like probably early 3rd round picks. And Kyron being one of these big ones that I think get pulled up the board. Now, I do think they're worth it in round 2. Like for Kyron and Henry and like Taylor and Saquon as well. I think all of those guys around 2 value like kind of running backs. I just like it a little bit less. It's so much more fun when you get them in round 3.
Yeah, that's the key. If you could have 2 really good wide receivers and then one of those guys, you're very excited about what that team looks like. I also think, to your point, I do think ADP is going to shift. And I mean, we always see that every year and I mean this with the most love I can possibly mean, the normies when they show up. And I say normal people because normal people aren't
We're the
drafting
sickos.
teams. Yeah, exactly. Normal people aren't drafting teams in April. So y'all are the smart ones to not to have you. I went back and looked at some of those teams. I don't even know what was happening back then. But the other part about that, however, is that if you go to other sites as well, and Underdog dominates best ball conversation now, rightfully so. They have so much of the volume. I get it. But if you go to FFPC, where I've been drafting on a little bit lately, you see a different thing. And it's not even because it's tight end premium. You also see running backs really shoved up the board as well. And I wonder if those FFPC ADPs look a lot more like what we're going to see home league ADPs. Like we're going to see at NFL.com what that ADP ends up looking like. I wonder if the FFPC one ends up looking like that. So this is something interesting to kind of keep in mind.
Like,
All right,
I,
another topic here for us are the Packers wide receivers. Rich and I kind of beat around this last week because we were talking about Christian Watson and how interested both of us are in Christian Watson. Christian Watson was the face of the Sharp Angles podcast last year, and his hamstrings ruined all of our lives. And now we're back. We're back for more punishment. We're ready again. We're ready to be hurt again by Christian Watson. But one of the interesting parts of the Christian Watson discussion is a lot of the positive that you could say about Christian Watson are end up being negatives for Jayden Reed based on a lot of some of the usage we saw last year when kind of everybody was on the field. And I actually didn't bring this up on the podcast because I looked at it. I looked at it about 10 minutes before the podcast started and I go, there's no way that this is right. And then I went and had Rich, who's much smarter than me and I trust much more than my own brain. I had him go and check this to make sure it was right. But it was right. Jordan Love had 179 dropbacks last season, including the playoffs, with only one or two wide receivers on the field. Jayden Reed was on the field for four of them. Four of them. And that's with Christian Watson missing a lot of time. So obviously things can change. Jayden Reed was very good last year, especially down the stretch from that week 9 on, once the Packers offense changed and became really good. I obviously all of this can change, but I look at just kind of the usage we saw with Dobbs, Watson, and Reed healthy, and I have a lot of trepidation about Reed, and I'm really interested in seeing through training camp reports in the preseason what this actually looks like with all three of them healthy.
Yeah, I mean, you could make it 4 because Dontavian Wicks played well enough last
There you
year where
go.
he deserves to be in
Well,
the mix as
let's
well.
let's go crazy. Let's throw Bo Melton in there. Let's just
Yeah.
Samari Tour. Let's just keep throwing names. Like they have Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft. There are so many of them. It's just how is this going to work out? It's just wild.
And last year I was all over Jayden Reed. Like he was I was writing about him, talking about him on a bunch of podcasts. Like, you want to take a shot on this kid. He is Wisconsin Debo is what I kept calling him. And
Hey, yeah.
it worked out down the stretch. Like, almost there was one league where we were down, like me and my co-manager were down like 40 going into the final Sunday night game. Jayden Reed put up 35 in the first half and then didn't play a single snap in the second half. I'm still salty about that one, but I loved him last year.
At least you don't let it live in your head rent free. At least you're
Oh
not
no,
still letting it
I
bother
don't
you.
think about it almost every day. I loved him though, but now you're paying full price for him, and there's a lot of concerns I have. Like you said, wasn't out there in 2 wide receiver sets, and that was with Christian Watson being hurt. And for some reason, I think Romeo Doubs is closer to a league average receiver than these other guys, but for some reason, Jordan Love and the Packers love him, so he's going to consistently be out there. Wicks played well. I looked at recently from week 10 on when Jordan Love really started to play well. At the per game pace of all 4 of those receivers. Now it's far from a perfect study because they were consistently in and out of the lineup. People were missing time and stuff like that, but none of them were on a 17 game pace for 1,000 yards. And none of them were putting up high touchdown numbers. In fact, the highest touchdown total was Christian Watson. So to me, Christian Watson is the perfect, like, I want him in best ball, because I do think that he could continue to be one of these players. Injuries are a big factor, like you said, but he's big play reliant as well at times. So that can be inconsistent for redraft, but he is very cheap. I know everyone loves Jordan Love now. I find myself lower on him than consensus. Like, I have him ranked as my QB 11, which is not. And someone yesterday tweeted me and they're like, "Why are you so low on Love?" And I was like, "I'm not," but he doesn't run a ton. Like, he had 4 rushing touchdowns last year, but that number could come down. He had less than 300 rushing yards, I believe. So he's not one of those quarterbacks who is going to heavily pad his stats with the rushing numbers. So of the pocket passers that I have in my top 11, guys like Joe Burrow is much more proven. And I trust, as long as Burrow is healthy, I trust that I know what I'm going to get out of him. Jordan Love, he was awesome down the stretch, but we have seen quarterbacks look otherworldly for half a season before and then not sustain that success. So to me, that is a factor or a little wrinkle in the Packers offense that I don't think it's factored in. Like, what if the real Jordan Love is somewhere in the middle? Because he was a tale of 2 halves last year. why are we going to believe that the off the charts play is what he always is? And we're like, it could be, and he could be that good. But I also think it's possible he could be a little bit worse than that. And if that's the case with 4 wide receivers and 2 tight ends vying for volume, I think it could be a headache week to week.
I'll push back a little bit on Love, but also I agree a little bit with your premise in general. In fact, there's a series on the site about top down regression and what happens with touchdowns per yards and things like that. Red zone performance, which the Packers in goal to go situations, I believe they scored a touchdown on 95% of their goal to go situations last year, which is a wild number that like had never happened since the 2000s. And so there are some regression markers there for him. But the two things I'll say about Love, the first thing is that his passing touchdown number, like PFF has him, I believe, under expectation on his passing touchdown number. And so that wasn't something that was, way out of the realm. But to your point, there was a market shift. I use that week 9, if you can use week 10 as well, like you did, all of that's fine. There was that market shift, but the reason why I trust that second half is because there was also a noticeable change in what they were doing. They were throwing the ball more quickly. They were throwing the ball more near the line of scrimmage. His average depth of target dropped precipitously and immediately. It was a 1-week thing. We were throwing the ball down the field. We saw that Matt LaFleur saw this isn't working. We started throwing it shorter, and all of a sudden the offense worked. Could defenses figure that out, over the offseason?
That's my
could things
concern.
change? Yeah, absolutely. Things can change. But there was a reason why he got better. It wasn't like a sudden, okay, suddenly I'm just running hot. There was a reason. There was a change that they made that made him better. And I think that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about Jordan Love, but also understanding that there are some kind of regression markers for this offense as a whole. I mean, they were the second best offense from week 9 on, I think, in points per drive. Do we think they're that good? I don't know. And so fair enough. And I think that that's a fair opinion to have for sure. And so that's why Love is tricky. Like I would never push back on, you said you had Love as a quarterback 11. I would never push back on that because there's a lot of cases you can make about Jordan Love. Jordan Love's a very kind of interesting fantasy option here.
I think the one that gives people pause is I have Jaden Daniels ahead of him. But I'm super bullish on Jaden Daniels.
No, you're in a safe space, my friend. Like oh, you mean guys that can run? Like are awesome runners at the quarterback position? You mean that you want to invest in those guys? We are the home of the original Konami code here. Like we are Jaden Daniels, team Jaden Daniels. I'm with you, but sing some praises for Jaden Daniels.
Yeah. People are like, "Oh, he's a rookie." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, he ran for 2,000 yards and 21 touchdowns his last 2 years in college. He could, if he runs for 800 yards at the NFL level year 1, which I think is very possible, he is going to be a top 7 or top 8 wide quarterback with even more upside depending on what he does in the passing game." And as someone who is a sucker for Terry McLaurin, I have hope that this passing attack could be even better than people are expecting.
I'm in again on Terry. Don't hurt me again, Terry. They got you a quarterback, please, scary Terry. We're all rooting for you for sure. Another confusing offense, another confusing receiver situation is in Jacksonville, and I'll just be honest with you. I honestly have no idea what to do with this receiver group. I have one take about this, and that the fact that Gabe Davis is so far behind Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas in drafts doesn't make a ton of sense to me and suggests a level of certainty about the Jaguars wide receivers that I don't know how you could have. But other than that, I mean, I'm lost. Do you have any strong feelings, strong takes on these? Add Evan Ingram to the mix. Any strong takes on this kind of receiving group?
Christian Kirk or bust is how I have been attacking this room because okay, last year Christian Kirk had a really weird week 1 where he was kind of getting eased into, he played 60% of the snaps or whatever. So I threw that game away. And then I looked from week 2 until he got hurt. I threw away the game that he got hurt because it was on the first catch he made of that game. So I forget what week that was that he got hurt. Oh, week 12. So from week 2 through week 12, when he was playing the full allotment of snaps and everything, he was averaging more fantasy points per game than Chris Olave and Devonta Smith. Now, he goes significantly cheaper than Chris Olave, and you still get a discount on him compared to Devonta Smith. So I believe in him. I think he is a lock to be on the field in 2 wide receiver sets. And
Yep.
I don't know if you could say that about either of the. I think Gabe Davis is going to make life harder on Brian Thomas Jr. than all of the Thomas Jr. people believe. Like, Gabe Davis might not be great for fantasy purposes, but real life teams don't care about our fantasy purposes. And Gabe Davis is an elite run blocker. He is an elite field stretcher. It's why people get annoyed at why was Gabe Davis getting so many snaps for the Bills? Why was MVS getting so many snaps for the Chiefs? You need that receiver out there to help everyone else, to open up stuff near the line of scrimmage. Because if you don't have that deep threat, teams could line up and kind of play you closer to the line of scrimmage, and then you get less running lanes, less short passes, less underneath stuff, everything. So I think Gabe Davis is going to be out there a lot. They paid the guy. But I don't want him for fantasy. We know that he's not great for fantasy. I think Brian Thomas could kind of be a similar asset, at least in year one. I think long term he's got upside, but I could see him being really inconsistent first year. And then I'm out on Evan Ingram. I know a lot of people like him. Last year, he set the record for catches by a tight end, most in NFL history. Dude didn't even get 1,000 yards. He didn't score a touchdown until Christian Kirk got hurt in week 13. So you look at his numbers with and without Christian Kirk. Without him, he was averaging almost 20 fantasy points per game. It was 11.6 with him. Like, he was a fine back end tight end one with Christian Kirk out there. But I think people are letting that final 5 weeks of the season elevate him to a level that I'm not. Because if you want him, you have to take him in that tier with Kincaid, Pitts, Kittle, and Ingram. I would say, like, they're all going in that range. I like those other three way more than Evan Ingram. So to me, I'm also not. I was very high on Trevor Lawrence when he came out, but I'm like, all right, we're 3 years in. Could he be better than he's been in the past? Yes. I don't think he's reached his ceiling yet, but I'm just kind of tired of chasing it and being let down for fantasy purposes. So for me, it's Christian Kirk. I think Christian Kirk is a huge value. I'm writing an article, top 10 wide receiver values, over at NFL.com, and it'll be out next week. Spoiler alert, Christian Kirk is on that list. But the rest of the Jaguars, outside of Travis Etienne, I don't really find myself targeting.
Yeah, so on Kirk, I'm with you on Kirk. Oh, because Calvin Ridley's gone, obviously. We know that Christian Kirk, before last season, the season prior to that, we saw more red zone usage from him. And I think that's the concern you would have with Kirk, is, are we actually going to get those touchdowns? We saw that before Calvin Ridley last year just absolutely dominated all of that work. That was where Calvin Ridley lived last year. Now Calvin Ridley's gone. We're going to see more from Kirk. I think your point about Evan Ingram and his splits with Christian Kirk is very important and something we need to look at. And also, like, it's weird. Evan Ingram's odd because he has like 2 or 3 of the biggest tight end games we've seen over the last 2 seasons from like a fantasy perspective. But then you think about his upside, and he just doesn't score touchdowns. He scored 4 touchdowns last year. He just doesn't score touchdowns. And so you think, well, what is the actual yearly upside here? I don't know with Evan Ingram. Let me push back on Gabe Davis. I'm gonna go ahead. Go ahead.
On Ingram, he doesn't score touchdowns. Every other tight end that ever had 100 catches, he had 114 last year, topped 1,000 yards. You could carve 20 catches off of him, 30 catches off of him, and it would still be the second most of his career. And he didn't have 1,000 with 114. Like, so if he's not scoring touchdowns, he needs the insane volume to live up to cost, in my opinion.
Yeah, and he hasn't scored more. I thought this was right, but I thought it in my head when I was saying he doesn't score touchdowns, but now I've gone and looked it up and made sure he hasn't scored more than 4 touchdowns since he was a rookie in 2017. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened for him. I'm going to push back on Gabe Davis a little bit for this reason. Like I said, Calvin Ridley's gone. I think Davis is going to be on the field. I think the MVS comp that you make there is really important for people to think in there. Valdez-Scantling just kept playing. Justin Watson just kept playing snaps in that offense. There's a reason why that's the case. I do think similarly of Gabe Davis here. And that's one of the reasons why his wide receiver 62 price just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The other reason is that Gabe Davis has been very good in the red zone. And that is what Calvin Ridley took away from them. Ridley had 52.2% of the targets in the end zone for the Jaguars last year. Even if Kirk is going to step up and seem more like what he did in 2022, that's still, like we said, Evan Ingram doesn't score touchdowns, right? We don't know what Brian Thomas is. That leaves a lot there from Davis. And Davis has scored on, I think, 40% of his career red zone targets, which is a really big number. And again, especially in best ball, if you're paying wide receiver 62 and he just randomly pops up with a couple, 3 or 4 2-touchdown games, as we know Gabe Davis can do. And I'm not like a massive Gabe Davis fan. I was definitely not on board in 2022 with the draft, with how high his price got then after that 4-touchdown game in the playoffs. He's only had a target on 15.4% of his career route runs. That had been 66th last season. Davis himself was 68th. I prefer to invest in target earners myself. That is what I am interested in. Gabe Davis has never been that. He was playing with Stephon Diggs, that's fair, but he's never been that throughout his career. However, he's the wide receiver 62, and we know he can just score 4 touchdowns in a game. And at some point, I'm like, all right, what are we doing? We
I'll
might as
take him in
well
best ball.
just do it.
I don't want the headache in
Yeah,
redraft.
that's
'Cause
fair.
you
Although
never know.
Davis,
That was the thing with Gabe Davis, is you truly never knew if it was a Gabe Davis week or not.
I think Rich might have cracked the code on Gabe Davis. It's all about man versus zone coverage. There's not a ton of teams play man anymore, so it's harder. But like he Rich was read Rich's worksheets every week about Gabe Davis, and he is the Gabe Davis whisperer. He is able to identify the Gabe Davis's game. So yeah, sharp football
My
analysis all year. Rich Revar's worksheets. Read him about Gabe Davis, and he'll tell you the ways on Gabe Davis.
Davis isn't much of a separator either. As a Bills fan, like I was at the Chargers game last year where Bills Chargers, where he caught that like 62-yard touchdown or whatever it was. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't think Trevor Lawrence could complete that throw. Like, I think Josh Allen is one of 2 or 3 quarterbacks alive that could make that throw. That's my other concern, is like,
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence is a fine quarterback, definitely a downgrade.
No, that's fair. By the way, this Josh, since you're a Bills fan, this is a perfect thing to talk about. This is Josh. I saw yesterday that Brandon Beane came out and said that, if you think Josh Allen is overrated, you don't know what you're talking about. And I thought that this was one of those famous, someone told me Steph Curry can't shoot 3 things. Like I thought he was just responding to nothing. But then I saw our old friend Dan Bazzuta shared with me that like a random scout said that Josh Allen was overrated. What are we doing, people? Sure, he makes mistakes, but that's also because he creates so much offense for that team. I don't think we have accepted how much more Josh Allen has gotten out of that roster than maybe it deserves. We're going to see it for real this year because I don't think their roster is very good this year, top to bottom. I think Josh Allen is the driving force of that team winning if they end up winning. I think that we have overrated the Bills roster just based on what Josh Allen is able to do just by himself to make that offense viable. And what are we talking about? How are we talking about Josh Allen being overrated? I don't get it.
If you want me to, I could talk about Josh Allen for hours. He is my favorite player of all time, and you could call me biased in that sense, but I have watched every single snap in his NFL career, and he does more. He's asked to do more than any other quarterback because he has to put up Mahomes type numbers with his arm and Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson type numbers with his legs. And then, yeah, people are like, oh, well, look, he's had top defenses and everything. Look at the last 2 years, the defenses the Bills have gone into the playoffs with. They are all second and third stringers. No team, I believe, has missed more starter snaps defensively the last 2 years than the Buffalo Bills. The O-line has been completely revamped under him. The OC changed midseason. It does not matter. He keeps winning 11 plus games every year. He wins the division every year. He puts up good. He's had one bad playoff game since 2020. Came against the Bengals. Against the Chiefs, he is awesome. The Bills just, here's my stat. Bills have lost to the Chiefs 3 times in the playoffs. They have never once sacked or turned over Patrick Mahomes. Insane. Sean McDermott should be long gone, in my opinion. I like the guy. He's a cool guy. The reason he is there is because Josh Allen. Like, no one does more for their team than Josh Allen, which is why I thought he should have been the MVP last year, and which is why I'm saying right now, if Josh Allen has a normal Josh Allen this year and the Bills have a normal Bills season this year, let's not even discuss the MVP because it should clearly be him.
Yeah. Are you with us? We got some pushback from Bills fans on the roster in our roster rankings. We got some pushback because we have real concerns about this, a lot of what's going on defense. We have real concerns, obviously, about the receiver situation. Like I think this roster is way more mid-pack than it even has been, and I'm concerned about it. And but to be fair, I'm also concerned about the Dolphins roster, and I don't know what Aaron Rodgers is going to be. And I wonder, one of my theories I'm going into this season with is that the AFC East is not as good as we think it is, and that's something I'm going to maybe be playing on as we get into like those first few weeks of the season, because I'm interested to kind of see how this all works out.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. Like the Dolphins have lost a lot of key pieces. The Bills, I mean, the list of players they lost is a scroll long, and the
It's
Jets, like
unbelievable. Yeah.
everyone just assumes that Rodgers is going to be back and going to be okay. I'm not in that thinking. I'm like, he's 40 years old. There's a very short list of quarterbacks who have played successfully in this late in their career, and now he's coming off of a severe injury, and so many of their other surrounding players are older players who have a history of injury. The thing on the Bills roster though is um one, they're getting some key pieces back. Like Matt Milano is huge
Huge.
for that
Yeah, huge.
defense. But the pieces they've lost, like Trey White, you're gonna miss him. You're gonna miss Micah Hyde. You're gonna miss Jordan Poyer.
Poyer.
I don't know how much left those guys have in the tank though. So like it was kind of time, I think. But yeah, McDermott has a history of developing defensive players. That's the thing I'll get. Like he is a defensive guru, and a lot of talent has developed defensively under him. Time to earn your check now, buddy. Like this is the year you got to develop a lot of these young talent and get them ready to go. And I believe in the receivers a little bit more, I think, than others, but that's just because I think Josh Allen will elevate them. I don't believe that they are one of the better receiving rooms or anything like that.
Well, you're looking at team Khalil Shakir over here, and so
Same.
we're we're in on that one. Also, I'm Von Miller quietly a couple years ago was still really good. And then last year, obviously, he had all the injury issues, and he's not going to be a full time player at this point in his career. It's just not going to happen. But if he's like a impact pass rusher, that changes a lot of the impact. Anyway, we're done. We're doing real football talk on the Bills. That's not what people are here for. Let's get through one more training camp storyline here, which I found very interesting, which are the Titans. And my question is, what is this Titans offense? What are we doing? Like, who's getting the ball? How pass heavy will it be now that they've made the coaching change to Brian Callahan? Who's going to see the most work in the backfield? Who's going to lead the team in targets? We have Hopkins, we have Calvin Ridley, we have Boyd. We still have our good dude, our good friend Chig Okonwa. So we're excited about everybody that's in there. I don't know any of the answers to those questions. At this point, I don't feel confident in any of the answers that I have for those questions. Are you confident in any of those, or is this really a wait and see what we can learn from training camp and preseason kind of thing?
This offense is going to be fun. And I have some I think I have some stronger takes because Um, look, it might not be fun for real life purposes, but it's gonna be fun for fantasy, I think. Like
Yeah.
I keep saying Will Levis, I don't know if he's good in real life. I think he's gonna be great for fantasy. I think he could be what like Jameis Winston was a few years ago, where like, yeah, maybe for real life purposes, for the Bucks
Sign
sake, it wasn't
me
great.
up.
Yeah,
Sign
but
me up for a Will
for
Levis 30-30
fantasy,
season. I'm
we're
in. That would be
we're gonna be
amazing.
having fun. And Calvin Ridley is who I'm all about in this offense because last year, Will Levis, 21% of his throws were 20 or more air yards. Every other starter was 14% or less. So Levis is keeping his eyes and chucking it downfield. He also was, I think he doubled the hero throw rate of any other starting quarterback in the NFL. And he led in first read rate. So it's partially why D Hop was good under Will Levis, was because he was just getting a bunch of volume going his way and a lot of deep balls going his way. I think that's going to be Calvin Ridley now. They've invested in him. D Hop is getting up there in age, and last year started to show signs of decline metric wise. And my rule of thumb is when I see a player that old starting to show slips in his like metrics and stuff like separation, catch rate, all of that. I stay away from that player. And I think Hopkins, the Titans, I think, brought Ridley in to be their new number one and make Hopkins their number two. And you've already heard Brian Callahan say that they're going to pass more. You're hearing beat reporters say that all summer long, like it's clearly been an emphasis that this is going to be a much more pass aggressive attack than it has been with Mike Vrabel in the past. And then Brian Callahan came out and said Calvin Ridley is going to play the Jamar Chase role. So I think that it could be a little boomer bust for fantasy purposes, but you're getting him as he's priced on Underdog as wide receiver 35. I mean, I think he brings all of the same upside that he brought last year with the Jaguars, but you're getting it at such a reduced cost because, again, it might not be fun for real life purposes, but when the Titans are down 3 scores in the fourth quarter and they're heaving the ball downfield to Calvin Ridley, I want that player on my team, especially as a wide receiver 3. You don't want your wide receiver 1 or 2 to be boomer bust, but if my wide receiver 3 brings a ceiling of like 25 points, I'll deal with the low floor because those games will just win you weeks when he goes off. So I don't have confidence about the backfield because both of those guys are kind of the same player. I'd
Yep.
like Tajay Spears a little bit more just because I think he's younger. And I tend with running backs to prefer the younger player, but they did pay Tony Pollard. So I think volume wise, it could be pretty split down the middle. But Will Levis and Calvin Ridley at cost are 2 big targets of mine.
On the backfield, they've already called them interchangeable, which you're like, all right, if the coaches don't know, then I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. But I do agree with you. And that price difference has really narrowed between Spears and Pollard. Pollard's still going ahead, but the difference is narrowed. There was a time in drafts where that was a lot wider, and you could say, okay, I'm just going to take Spears because Spears is the one who's a lot cheaper. That price difference, it still exists. It's not as wide, and so that makes it a little more tricky. To your point, the one thing I am certain of with this offense is they're going to throw the ball a lot more. That is the one thing I'm confident is going to happen. They're going to use a lot more 11 personnel. I am confident in those things happening. For Levis, you mentioned the deep rate last year, which was it was literally off the charts. I like to talk about the Pittsburgh offense and kind of the fact that they brought in Wilson and Fields, the 2 guys who were second and third behind Levis in deep passing rate last year and have always been those kinds of quarterbacks. And that's what I expect we're going to see a lot of from Pittsburgh, the kind of dink and dunk and then deep shots. But they weren't even close. Like, I think they were at like 14 and 13%, something like that. They were not even close to where Will Levis was in the 20%. It was just wild to watch what they were doing. I mean, that is one of the strengths of Will Levis, so I don't think they're going to shy away from that completely. But I don't think we're going to see them throwing down the field that much
Yeah.
moving forward. Like it's going to be a little bit different. But to your point, if they view him in that Jamar Chase and maybe Hopkins can be that bigger T Higgins, you're going to be more excited about Calvin Ridley, especially if they view him as the version of Jamar Chase we've seen over the last couple years, in which they're using him all around the field and they're using him closer to the line of scrimmage than they did early in his career. He's turned really more into a full field receiver. Calvin Ridley, obviously, we know can do that. The one thing I'll push back on is the age thing. I mean, they're not that much different in age, are they? At this point, like I. Calvin Ridley entered the league. So Calvin Ridley's 30, right? Like we're there. Calvin Ridley, he will be 30 in December. Okay, he's 29. I'm gonna let you have your 29, Calvin Ridley. I'm holding on to my 39 for until the last moment possible.
As you
So I'm
should.
going to let you. I will let you have your 29 until December, and then DeAndre Hopkins there is 32, just turned 32 in June, and the age difference. I don't know. To your point, there were some slips in the metrics for Hopkins, and I think what you said is a very smart way to approach things. If you start to see that slip and you see a wide receiver at that point in the age curve, you go, okay, that's fine. But Calvin Ridley's older, I think, than we think he is, and that's the only point that I
He
would
is.
make
I
about that.
entered the league late, had the suspension where he was gone for a year and a half and all. But if you want to look at that as a flip side, D Hop's an
We're
old
doing tread on the
32.
tires.
Ridley
Yeah,
is a
there you go.
young 29.
There we go.
It's funny how we
It
convince
is.
ourselves.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's all this is about because none of us know. This is all just about making whatever argument that makes sense to you, and I do agree with you about Ridley here. So that's good. I think that's about all we had time for. I did want to make a desperate plea that we might be too low on the Panthers offense, but I'll save that.
I
I'll save
agree.
that for later. Well, I'm happy. We're in agreement here about the Panthers offense. There's actually a lot about that on the website this week from Rich. If you go and read Rich's series this week about kind of looking at league trends and things like that, the Panthers show up time and time and time and time and time again as a team that is almost certain to be better on offense moving forward, even without considering that they added Deontay Johnson and they have Dave Canales, who resurrected the careers of Cheeto Smith and Baker Mayfield in each of the last 2 seasons. So lots of things for the Panthers, but all of that's available. Sharp Football Analysis. Go and check that out. Go and make sure you check out Michael F. Florio on Twitter, on Instagram. Michael F. Florio NFL on TikTok. Make sure you go check it out. You mentioned that series you have out about underrated players. Anything else out there that you want to make sure people check out?
Yeah, so that's on NFL.com. I'm gonna have top 10 wide receiver values. Deontay Johnson is in that list as well.
Hey, there we go.
Every week, gonna have more articles coming out there. Fantasy football, the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast. Me, Marcus Grant, Laquan Jones, twice a week right now. We have the cheat sheet over on YouTube. August 12th, set your DVRs because Fantasy Live is back. And then I can't leave off rotoballer.com. I have a series right now, Best Ball Strategy, top best ball targets, late round targets, stuff like that. And I'm going to have a lot more articles coming out there. Florio's football show there. And if you still want more, SiriusXM every Sunday, 12 to 2 p.m. Pacific. So what is that? 3 to 5 Eastern with myself and Scott the King Engel.
That podcast lineup you have there with you, Marcus, and Laquan, it's Murderers Row right there. I mean, that's the heart of the lineup right there. What a great group.
It's always fun getting half the time we talk about stuff that isn't football related because we just end up, but the football stuff is also very good as well.
Yeah, no, those are the best though, right? I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the Olympics in this podcast or anything. There's no, we don't need to always talk about football. There's lots of interesting stuff happening. I saw Twisters very recently, which is the most unintentionally funny movie I've ever seen in my entire life.
Really?
So if you go into it wanting a good laugh at just the blatant absurdity of it, I'm telling you, Twisters. Just is the way to go. Anyway, we obviously also have this podcast, Sharp Angles Podcast. If you're listening to us, we really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe for the audio podcast. Also, make sure you go subscribe on YouTube. We appreciate it. Obviously, I mentioned over at Sharp Football Analysis, we have the draft kit. We have Warren Sharp's preview book, a ton of stuff over there. Go to sharp.football and you'll find links to everything that we've got going. And we'll be back to talk with you real soon.